Hello everyone! In this video tutorial, I will show you how you can introduce progression into your own Scratch games by increasing your game complexity. And exactly how I do so, I'm not going to reveal it yet. I want you to take a look at my gameplay before I say the answer. Okay, so just to introduce the game that I have here, this is a game called Avoid the Dots. It is basically a survival game. So I will need to control this colorful blob sprite to move around the game screen and avoid dot sprites that appear on it. Okay? And the longer I survive within this game, the more score points I get. My score variable is basically related to time. So the longer time I stay in the game, the higher the score. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin. I want you to observe the gameplay and what happens in the game. Oops. Okay, so that's the game over for my game. Okay, so everyone, did you notice as I kept playing the game, the longer I survive, the longer time I spend in the game, the longer I survive in the game, there's an increase in competition factor. The enemy sprites has been increased in number. Okay, so this is one way you can actually introduce progression in your game through increasing game complexity by increasing the competition in your game. Okay, so in this case, what I did was to clone my enemy sprites, which were the little black dot sprites that I had to avoid. Okay, now let's understand how this works. I'm going to show you the code behind the game. Okay, first things first, I'm going to hop over to my dot sprite. So this is the enemy sprite that I have to avoid. I'm just going to read out the code here. For my dot enemy sprite, when I start the game on green flag click, I have fixed its size to 20%. It starts off by hiding itself. Okay, so it doesn't come out first. Then, forever, I made my Scratch game choose a random time interval for it to create clones of itself. And what happens to the clones? When my dot sprite starts as a clone, it will finally show itself and then it will choose a random position to glide to. If it's on the edge of the game, it bounces off the edge. Okay? Now, this clone code is the one that allows us to create many multiple enemy sprites, and that in turn allows us to increase the competition and complexity of our Scratch game and introduce a factor of progression. Okay, and then I'm just going to continue. I have another code for my clone sprite. Each of my clone enemy sprite are able to stop the entire game if they do touch the blob sprite, which is my player sprite. Okay, so this is a simple way you can actually increase game complexity to introduce progression in your game through cloning your enemy sprite to increase the competition. Alright, now I'm going to show you another way you can increase the game complexity to introduce progression in your game. This is basically increasing the challenge factor, not so much the competition. For this, I'm going to fix the number of enemy dot sprites in my game, but I'm going to disadvantage my player sprite. Let me show you how I do it. Okay, let me just fix my enemy sprite code first. Instead of creating clones forever, I'm just going to limit my clone creation to about 5 clones. So control repeat 5 times. I am going to do a create clone of myself. Okay, that's all. Now let's jump over to our player sprite, the blob sprite. Okay, now I'm going to increase the game complexity by disadvantaging my blob player sprite. How I do this is basically working against the gameplay. Okay, in this game, the purpose of this game is for me to survive the game by avoiding the dot sprite. And how I do that is to navigate around the space of the game. Now, what happens if I increase the size of my player sprite all the time? As the game goes on, slowly, my player sprite will gradually start to increase to a size that is almost impossible to avoid the dot sprite. That basically increases the game complexity and adds a challenge for the progression of the game. Okay, so let's do that. Under looks, I'm going to pull out a simple change size block, okay, I'm going to vary the factor by 1%. Trust me, this will increase very fast. Okay, and then I'm just going to pop this code into my current code for score change here. I'm just going to tap use the same wait function for the size to increase, because the size will increase with time as how my score increases with time. Okay, now let's test this out and see what happens. Okay, so as you can see, my number of enemy dot sprites is fixed at a number of 5. And if you observe carefully, my player blob sprite is actually slowly growing in size. Okay, I'm going to keep playing and doing the best that I can to avoid all these dot sprite. Let's see how far I can go before I finally game over. Okay, quite a high score I have there. Okay, as you can see, my sprite is getting a lot bigger. It's getting a bit more tricky, trying to avoid all these little sprites. Okay, and one thing about this game is that I always bounce off the edge of the screen. I'm unable to pass through the edge of the screen, so there's no way I can cheat in this game. Phew, that was close. Oh no! Okay, so that basically ends the game. Alright, so everyone, this is another way you can increase game complexity by increasing the challenges in your game through disadvantaging your player sprite. Okay, so just to summarize, in this video tutorial, I've shown you 2 ways to introduce progression into your Scratch game by increasing game complexity, cloning enemy sprites, or disadvantaging your player sprites. Okay, so try this out. Let's see what else you can do.